In September of 1950, Congress approved the Federal Disaster Relief Act to provide limited assistance to disasters. Because again, the country was looking at the federal government as to, what are you going to do to help us? Our resources at the state level, at the municipal level, are overburdened. We need assistance, but yet there was nothing in place at the federal level. The Office of Defense Mobilization was assigned disaster relief responsibilities until 1973. If we look from 1958 to 1971, the Federal Civil Defense Act amended to allow the federal government to provide funding for civil emergency preparedness. This was a significant increase because now the federal government was providing some local communities with funding to prepare for a disaster. This generally was a 50-50 funds for personnel and administrative costs for agencies engaged in civil defense preparedness. So it wasn't just a blank check, but the local community or state had to have a matching funds of 50%. Therefore, the thinking behind that was that the communities would be a little less inclined to just go out and spend money on useless projects. That if they had to personally spend their tax dollars, they would be more inclined to be somewhat frugal with that appropriation. It was in 1961 John F. Kennedy separated the civil defense and other emergency preparedness functions into two agencies. The Office of Civil Defense, the Department of Civil Defense, it was engaged in engineering studies of shelters, stockpiling of supplies for disasters. The second office was the Emergency Planning, responsible for all civil preparedness actions, activities, resources, disaster relief. Later on, they became the Office of Emergency Preparedness in 1968. In 1971, the Office of Emergency Preparedness was now named the Defense Civil Preparedness Agency. Federal funds could now be used for disaster planning. So as you can see, over a period of time, civil defense and the way that the federal government responded to and prepared for disasters has undergone several changes. Name changes, organizationally, they would be broken apart, divided into different offices. And what we saw was an expansion of the agencies at the federal level now being involved with disaster management. We look from 1972 to 1992. In 1979, FEMA was established. Executive Order 1212-7 created FEMA. In 1988, the Stratford Act amended the Disaster Relief Act of 1974. The onset of comprehensive emergency management was now on our doorstep. Again, at the federal level, the question still remained, where do you put these different agencies? Under what umbrella are these agencies going to be housed under? As we witnessed during this time frame, some of it was housed under the HUD, Housing and Urban Development. At the time, there was over 100 federal agencies involved in a disaster. And yet, there was no coordination effort amongst these 100 agencies. The federal government saw that there was a need for insurance for communities and civilians who experience a loss due to floods. So the Federal Insurance Administration was created in 1968 to provide flood, riot, and crime insurance for people that experience losses as a result of these incidents. During this process in evolving with over 100 federal agencies involved in this planning, Congress had some oversight into this. Part of the problem was that there were 23 congressional committee oversights of these different agencies. So there was no coordinated effort. Congress had their hands in it. The local, state were involved. They wanted demands for services, for emergency planning and mitigation. And yet, most of the time, it was bogged down in congressional committees. The Department of Defense retained, at the time, Civil Defense Preparedness Agency. So now Civil Defense was under the umbrella of Department of Defense because